April of 2018. The Escape from Tarkov community had been given the biggest patch yet, patch 0.8. Along with a full wipe, there were a bunch of noteworthy updates to the game. The most significant change to the gameplay was magazine reloading. As shown in the previous episodes of this series, prior to this change you were able to drag and drop stacks of ammo onto magazines and they would instantly be refilled. Not only do you now need to open up your inventory to load and unload rounds one by one, but you only know the number of rounds in a magazine if they were taken into a raid by you or you check the magazine. As soon as any rounds are fired from the magazine, the count becomes unknown and will require a mag check. Checking magazines would give you an approximate count with the precision of the count based on a few different things, such as if the magazine is windowed or not and the size of the mag. A new skill was added to go along with this change called mag drills, which has an effect on the speed of loading, unloading, and checking mags. This patch also came with a few quality of life improvements. You can no longer sell containers to traders that have items in them, something that had resulted in a number of accidental and unfortunate moments, as well as one underrated change, the ability to partially turn in quest items. For example, at the time, the Ragman quest, Dress to Kill, required that you turn in 7 Ushankas and 7 cowboy hats. Now it's already difficult enough having these items take up so much space in your inventory if you are prematurely gathering them before you unlock the quest, so being able to turn them in before you've gathered all 14 is a fantastic quality of life improvement. This change freed up tons of inventory space for players, especially standard edition players, while they were progressing through the quests, trying to grow their collections of Tarkov guns, gear, and loot. Two more massive changes during this period was the addition of the face hitbox and the Ricochet mechanic. This change, while subtle to many players, drastically altered the behavior and effectiveness of most of the helmets in the game, exposing the most vulnerable part of the character's body, the head, even while wearing head protection. Now, given that many helmets don't provide face protection, and even when they did, through the use of face shields, those face shields tended to be one or more armor classes below the helmets themselves, this change immediately altered the effectiveness of many of the bullets in the game, drastically increasing the chances for someone new and undergeared to actually have a fighting chance against even the most heavily armored chads. And while the reception of this feature was polarizing, a ton of memes had been created at the time about it. Little did we know what would be coming in the future. Now regarding ricochet chances, now when shot in the helmet, depending on the angle of the bullet and a new ricochet chance stat that was added to helmets, any bullet fired that impacts the helmet might ricochet, preventing the bullet from penetrating and doing minimal armor damage as well as blunt damage. Now this was in contrast to the previous change with the face hitbox in that getting hit in the head was much more survivable in many cases as compared to the past. Now speaking of armor and blunt damage, during this period was when we saw the addition of a new property of armor, material. Now before this, outside of armor class and the starting durability values, pretty much every armor acted the same when it came to how much damage it took when it was hit, how much durability was restored upon repairing, and how much blunt damage players took when rounds were stopped by the armor. Now these factors were all affected by the material of the armor, adding a significant amount of complexity to the ballistic system and the number of considerations players needed to make when choosing armor they were going to be taking in with them during their raids. A basic in-game tutorial was also added, which walked players through a number of the screens in the game, displaying tooltips with information about the major features, such as loading magazines and guns, buying and selling from traders, and modifying weapons. We also saw the introduction of Tarkov's latest map, Interchange. And the most noteworthy thing about the addition of Interchange was that the initial release had both AI and player scavs disabled. It was effectively a PMC-only map. This was largely due to performance concerns, considering that it was the most complex and resource-intensive map in the game at the time, so while they worked to optimize the map, scavs were turned off. Along with Interchange came the addition of a new trader, Ragman, and along with him came a new host of quests, as well as a bunch of new armor, clothing items, accessories, and other gear. The M2 armored chest rig was the first of its kind added to Tarkov. Before this, body armor was distinct from chest rigs, but now you could wear a chest rig that was armored and at the same time wear body armor as well. We also saw the addition of the black Fast MT, the Alton helmet and the Gazelle armor, sword and headphones, and a few new backpacks. Additionally, ammunition cases and medical cases were added to the game, huge quality of life stash improvements that we still enjoy to this day. Finally, a few new guns were added, the most notably of which was the M1A, but we also got a few new AK variants, the Remington 870 pump-action shotgun, and the APS and APB automatic pistols. The Skier Quest supplier was updated from its initial requirements of 1 6B43 6A body armor, aka the OG Fort armor, and a Kiver helmet, to requiring a Module 3M armor and a TAWS 106 bolt-action shotgun, making the quest immensely easier to complete, especially for new players, although it is noteworthy that during this period it wasn't terribly uncommon for normal scavs to be wearing Fort armor, especially the ones that spawn during the final minutes of raids, like in Factory. Another nice quality of life change was that up until this point, skill rollback was present in the game, meaning that as time went on, either because you weren't playing the game or because you weren't actively progressing a particular skill, your skill points would actually decrease. This feature was removed from the game, eliminating a quite frustrating aspect of the game for many more casual players that didn't have time to play every day. Now, the final change worth mentioning is a small one, and that's that Bitcoin could now be stored inside many cases for the first time. A month later, in May, patch 8.3 was released, adding scavs to Interchange, over 20 new quests for Ragman and Mechanic, as well as the addition of a number of new weapon modifications primarily for the recently added M1A. This period of time was also marked by a few noteworthy bugs and exploits. The first of which was an issue that had gained the attention of the wider community was the fact that the fire rate of guns was linked to the frame rate of the game, which would cause guns to fire significantly slower during the big FPS drops that weren't uncommon during gunfights. At the same time, a few different exploits were poisoning the game, with the first being known by a few different names, the most common being gamma glitching or pistol glitching, although it wasn't just limited to pistols or the gamma container. Upon doing a very specific series of steps that involved moving rigs or guns around their inventory, hotkeying items, and other stuff in between, players were able to equip a gun while at the same time having that gun be in their protector case and therefore unlootable by anybody that killed them. Almost every raid at the time, you'd come across a naked player with a gun in their hands, most commonly pistols due to their size, but every now and then you would come across people using an M4 or an RSAS, as at the time they could fit into Epsilon containers, and if you killed them, you'd be unable to loot it from them, leaving only a measly dog tag as your reward. Now, this made it so players could essentially risk nothing, just like a hatchet run, but while also being a big risk for players playing the game legitimately. Another depressingly common exploit was the factory door glitch, which involved players using a combination of door mechanics and issues with map geometries to glitch themselves into a particular spot on factory, causing their hitbox and player model to become disjointed, effectively making them invincible to gunshots. I believe that they were killable using grenades, as the explosion radius was likely large enough to reach their glitched out hitbox, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Luckily, by June, the secure container exploit had been patched, but the factory door glitch remained. Now, despite all these issues at the time, as mentioned in the last episode, this period in Tarkov's history is widely regarded by many veterans of the game as one of the most fun periods that the game had ever seen. Much of this, of course, is nostalgia, and both despite and due to the hilarity, bugs, and other issues that existed in the game at the time, there was some fantastic content created.
You play text north or south?
I got it.
July of 2018 was patch 0.9. It had been just 3 months since the last wipe, although player stashes were wiped once more, with the only bit of progress remaining untouched being trader reputation and weapon mastering. While this major patch wasn't nearly as significant as the prior, it did include a ton of firsts for Escape from Tarkov. Along with a bunch of new loot containers added to Factory, Customs, and Woods, a new type of exfil, a paid exfil, was added to both Customs and Interchange. Now players could use rubles brought into raid or collected while in raid to pay to be exfiltrated from the map after waiting 60 seconds and not straying too far from the relatively small extraction area when this time was up. 14 new quests were added to Mechanic, Ragman, and Skier. The ammo case's internal capacity was increased to 6x6, up from the original 4x4, and the stash size of all players was increased. This patch included the addition of an entirely new type of NPC, the first ever Scav boss, Dealmaker, aka Reshala. Up until this point, the AI characters were limited only to simple Scavs. Now we had a significantly more powerful and aggressive NPC to contend with, surrounded by a squad of ex-factory workers with heavily modified guns and much higher class body armor. He didn't spawn in every raid, and him and his cronies could be found on Customs, wandering the halls of dorms, as well as at new gas station. He also employed some unique new behavior. Upon encountering him in certain situations, like if you were to kill all of his guards, he would actually retreat and in a way hide from you, very often surprising and ambushing you later when you went to look for him. As is the case with most major patches, we had a ton of new gear added to the game, although there were a few that were the most noteworthy. Players saw the addition of the first alternate throwable items, flashbangs and smoke grenades. One of the initial pain points related to the first implementation of flashbangs was that they popped very shortly after they were thrown, as well as the sound they made when hitting the ground at the time was identical to normal explosive grenades, which gave players almost no time to react to them and made them entirely indistinguishable from the much more dangerous alternative. This was the patch where the Voodoo and the Burris Fullfield, some of the most popular and widely used LPVOs even to this day, were added to the game. These optics, being able to quickly swap between 1x and 4x in the case of the Burris and 6x in the case of the Voodoo, had a significant impact on the landscape of combat, adding a new level of versatility to all sorts of gun builds in a ton of different situations, from CQB to long-range fights. This versatility, coupled with the clean design of the reticles, resulted in a major meta shift away from optics like the Bravo, L-Can, and Hammer over to these new LPVOs. New firearm additions included the Glock 18C full automatic 9mm pistol and the iconic SA-58. actually manageable.
Die, Scav.
Along with the addition of armbands into the game and a new pair of budget active headphones, the GSSHs, some other noteworthy gear additions included the Shattered Mask, the Ronin and U-Latch helmets, the TacTech armored chest rig, and the Gen 4 body armor in a few different forms. Now, in August of 2018, due to changes with the AI resulting in their being quite difficult as compared to the recent past, their common use of rifles like the SKS, as well as shotguns with buckshot, and most importantly, their apparent tendency to hit the legs of PMCs more often than anywhere else, this time period was the height of the meme of Scav leg meta. The idea that the AI characters were intentionally designed to aim at the player's legs, either in order to hinder their mobility or to bypass their body armor entirely, was one of the most common complaints of players during this period. The player base, including many of the prominent content creators at the time, were quite vocal to Nikita on podcasts and in forum posts that they weren't fans of Scavs purposely aiming at PMC legs, but the problem was that Nikita denied this was the case, saying that at the time they were absolutely not programmed to do that behavior.
If you will target the chest or even stomach, they will drop. The projectiles will be dropped to the legs, and this is why leg meta exists.
My personal anecdotal experience led me to believe that there was indeed something at play here. I felt as if something was going on with their behavior, that my experiences coupled with those of the community were evidence enough to warrant an investigation of this issue, but I also proceeded under the working assumption that Nikita wasn't lying or mistaken, given his confidence and repeated denial of this specifically programmed behavior. Operating under those two assumptions, the logical conclusion that I came to at the time that would explain the state of affairs the community and devs found ourselves in was that this issue was an unintentional bug. This would explain why we were all experiencing this, as well as why Nikita felt so strongly that it was not the case. Unfortunately, as is all too common with things like this, the disconnect in communication between the community and the developers was, at least in my view, the biggest obstacle in the way of getting this issue resolved. So this was the birth of some of the earliest days of Veritas science. A brief summary of my findings were that Scav aim was entirely independent from the gun they had, whether or not you were behind cover, or if you were wearing armor or not. What I found was that within 25 meters, Scav aim was consistent and distributed reasonably, whereas over about 25 meters, they hit disproportionately low, blacking out your stomach and legs. It was so bad, in fact, that if you were standing behind even partial hard cover, you were fairly safe as most of their shots would be low, and even worse, proning out while at distance would result in Scavs hitting the ground way in front of you. Now, because Scav aim was, and pretty much still is, based on a simple circle surrounding the player and a fairly random distribution within that circle, my conclusion was that something was affecting the location of the player model, or the calculations that the Scav used to resolve the player model for that random hit distribution was bugged. Now, after doing my analysis and coming to this conclusion, I shared all the information with Nikita, although this issue wouldn't be dealt with for another year, so we'll be coming back to this. The final thing I want to mention was the inexplicable excitement the community had for the upcoming addition of the Mosin Nagant rifle into the game. Everything that's transpired between then and now has led to a sort of post-traumatic stress-induced amnesia that is causing me to entirely forget why this gun was one of the most hyped guns the EFT community had ever seen. But nevertheless, this was unfortunately the case.
We want the Mosin netcode improvements. Engine crashes fixed, more optimization. We want the Mosin. We want the Mosin.
We then found ourselves in September of 2018, patch 0.10, another massive patch that had significant impact on Tarkov for the next 4 years, although the initial release of the patch came with a number of issues. Now, luckily, most of these issues were sorted out very quickly, but it has to be said that this update was one of the initially buggiest updates that we had ever seen.
Come out, you coward! What? Die, Scav! Man, you're fucked. Die, Scav!
Oh shit, that's right. Wait, you can do the foul. We can mod the foul, right? Some new quality of life improvements included a change that made it so that the fire mode for weapons that you had in a raid before would persist between raids, no longer requiring players to put their guns in full auto at the start of every single raid, something we had all become accustomed to, but also something that was screwing over so many players for so long. The factory office extraction point for player scavs also used to overlap with the safe, meaning that you basically had no chance to properly loot the safe as a player scav before you'd be taken out of the raid, although this update shifted the Exfils zone so that it no longer overlapped with the safe, effectively eliminating this issue. We also saw some adjustments to some of the most egregious wood spawns, very often resulting in players spawning literally feet from other squads. After this update, Flashbangs had a much longer delay, as well as a unique sound allowing players to easily distinguish between normal grenades and give you time to properly react to the situation. The player list that you would see before you enter a raid no longer shows everybody that's on that screen. You need to press the Looking for Group button if you want it to make your name visible. I'm pretty sure this was primarily done for live streamers who would very often get harassed by folks Q-sniping them, waiting for the names to pop up in the list and then quickly disappear, allowing them to queue into the same raid at the same time quite easily. Now, to go along with that change, a new Ready button was added to many of the pre-raid screens, allowing players to skip a bunch of these screens that most of them skipped over, especially if they happen to be solo players. The first iteration of player name moderation and censorship was implemented by the devs, allowing them to force players to change their names if they were racist, homophobic, or otherwise toxic in any way. The in-game discard action could finally be rebound to a button other than the default, which was the delete button, making it much easier to be able to quickly discard items without needing to take your hand off the mouse or moving your left hand significantly. The addition of filters for both your inventory and the trader menus made searching for specific items appreciably easier, especially with the more commonly used trader at the time, Fence, the only source for some of the rare items in the game that players were often looking for. It wasn't uncommon for many players to sell their beta or epsilon containers to Fence so that standard edition players might have a chance to buy them. The final noteworthy quality of life improvement was that items could more quickly and easily be hotkeyed by hovering over the item and pressing the corresponding number key on your keyboard, rather than requiring you to drag and drop the item onto the hotbar. Another big change to the in-game experience were the brand new weapon retention mechanics. Prior to this change, anytime your player would be close enough to another player, a wall, or otherwise any other obstacle, your gun would be pushed straight up into the air, preventing you from properly aiming and shooting in tons of situations. Now, after this change, your character had much more flexibility, range of motion, and ability to handle the gun in a more intuitive and less annoying way. This update also came with a number of noteworthy bug fixes. For a while leading up to this update, helmet face shields were entirely broken, never actually blocking any shots, protecting the relatively new face hitbox. This update finally had this issue resolved. We also saw the issue related to FPS and fire rate being linked being partially fixed. I was able to test and discover that this issue had been fixed for fully auto guns, but semi-auto guns were still negatively affected. This patch also introduced an issue with iron sights, leading to serious consistency problems between different guns, causing loads of issues and confusion that had been attributed to all sorts of things like hit registration and ballistics, and in some cases were entirely broken. The phenomenon that was commonly known at the time as the streamer strut was fixed as well, which occurred when players would press shift to sprint for a brief moment, causing them to speed forward faster than normal walking, but no footstep noises were made. Now, not only was this problematic from a gameplay perspective, but it was also extremely annoying and immersion breaking for spectators of the game as well as for players. What came along with this and other related changes to keybinds like holding breath was the introduction of a related issue. Prior to this change, you used to be able to press shift and then the W key to initiate a sprint, but now you were required to press W before hitting shift, otherwise your player would simply walk, resulting in a ton of awkward situations where you die in combat because you couldn't properly retreat. Now, as is usually the case with every major update, we saw a number of new bugs. One such controversial issue was exposed and, depending on who you talk to, popularized by Cotton, the roof glitch on Interchange, as well as other out-of-bounds related issues.
It's a glitchy mess. You're not supposed to be up here. Oh, neat. Oh, whoa. Can I get a matrix in the chat, please, boys? This is a big-ass building. When you're on the roof and you can actually just see how long it is, this is a big fucking building. That's nutty, man. Wait, I wonder what that does for my FPS. Well, I'm already at 120. 122. Well, okay, so it doesn't really... What the fuck? Okay. That's the other side. Oh, there's another staircase right here. Let me check that out. I'm gonna do it in a real game. No, I don't want to be a shitlord and glitch a real game. This is offline mode for science. I don't want to come up here and actually kill people, because that's ruining somebody else's gameplay experience. I'm not trying to be an asshole.
Around the same period, we had been experiencing a new issue that was taken advantage of as an exploit, known as Dolphin Diving. Now, much more problematic than a normal drop shot, the Dolphin Dive bug would lead to your player model being disjointed from your hitbox, moving it downward slightly every time that you went prone, causing you to effectively become invincible by repeatedly proning out. I had a hunch at the time that another major contributing factor was desynchronization of player positions between the clients and the server, although as with most things like this, I've never received a confirmation of that theory. I was able to take this rare footage of the perspective from two different content creators and attempt to share it with the community as a lesson about their assumptions, usually related to cheaters or other unrelated bugs, and how often those assumptions were wrong. Something that I would be consistently talking about every few months in pretty much most of my videos to this day. Now, at the time, according to the patch notes, they claimed to have fixed the scope zeroing issues related to players' FOV settings, although this issue was in fact not fixed. Now, at the time, due to the sheer number of items that were added to the game and what was available at level 1 traders, it was also becoming more and more evident how annoying examining items was, especially given that there was no hotkey at the time to examine items. You literally had to right-click and then select Examine from the drop-down for every single item. And what made this worse was that at the time we saw the addition of the most elaborate and literally never used feature in the game, the Handbook. I don't personally know of anyone who ever actually used this feature as intended, but I do know that for every single item you examined, an annoying little badge would pop up on the bottom of your inventory that couldn't be dismissed unless you went in, clicked through all of the menus, expanded each section, just to highlight the newly examined item, which would clear the badge. To this day, I still have no idea who came up with this feature or why BSG thought it needed to be added to the game. This update also marked one of the worst periods that we ever saw when it came to Reshala and his guards simply being way too overpowered.
Want to run over? I think there's somebody over there. Oh, whoa! Oh my god! I was right!
Their vision, reaction time, and aim were inhuman, and this would unfortunately not be the last time that the more advanced AI characters would end up being considered completely broken. Now, one of the most painful bugs that was going around at the time involved discarding items. which caused you to both discard the item that you had indicated while simultaneously discarding another item that you had previously hovered over. This led to many people losing expensive keys, docs cases, key bars, and more. Finally, due to community pressure, a special and uncommon account type known as the press kit was changed to be identical to the EOD package. Press kits were provided to content creators and, of course, the press, like video game reviewers and reporters, to provide a wide array of gear and accessories for demonstration purposes. Naturally, if a video game website or content creator outside of the Tarkov community wanted to do a week of testing and gameplay to maybe write up an article or make a video reviewing the game, giving them the normal initial starting items would massively limit their ability to talk about all that the game has to offer in terms of extensive weapon availability, modification, and gear. Something that was, at least in my opinion, vital to really understanding the realism and immersion of the game. The press kit contained a bit of everything, from backpacks to chest rigs, helmets, active headphones, and night vision. It included a bunch of the different types of meds in the game, a few pieces of body armor, a handful of grenades, as well as a bunch of weapon cases that were full of a bunch of guns in the game, some totally stock and others more heavily modified. Arguably, the most controversial aspect of the press kit was that it came with 1,000,000 rubles, 200,000 euros, and 300,000 US dollars. Now, as is usually the case, the community at the time largely misunderstood exactly what the purpose of the press kit was, and took issue with not only the media getting access to it, but primarily streamers. Now, while I understand much of the criticisms over this, quote, not being representative of the core game, I mostly took issue with much of the specific criticisms that folks had with it, such as the amount of money that players were given at the start. I personally had a press kit along with my main EOD account, and honestly, I only ever used it for offline testing purposes because of how awkward and clunky it was. At the time, I really didn't have issues with them removing the press kits from the game. The primary issues I had were the skewed perception that it got from the community, and the fact that they were so poorly designed and not very well thought out. Sure, you got a ton of gear and a bunch of money. Now, while many of the guns were modestly modified, they also came along with a few magazines filled with some of the worst ammo in the game at the time that nobody was really using, like 9mm PSO or 545 BP. But what was most significant was that although you had all that money, you had nothing to spend it on because you started with a level 1 account with level 1 traders, who had almost nothing significant for sale. Their stocks were extremely bare bones, and anyone who's played Tarkov for any amount of time, especially new players, would know that all of this stuff could easily be lost in an afternoon of gameplay, leaving you with a heap of money that you couldn't spend and a bunch of empty cases. Now, I actually agree that press kits didn't fairly represent the game that was Tarkov at the time, but for entirely different reasons than most folks were butthurt about. Nevertheless, that issue would be behind us. This patch came with the addition of the MP7 SMG, an exciting new gun that would make viable submachine guns for arguably the first time in a long time. Finally, along with the addition of the MP7, arguably the most effective gun pound for pound when it came to relative size, we also saw a resurgence of the infamous Gamma glitch. And of course, we were given the long-anticipated Mosin Nagant rifle that, at least initially, was extremely well received.
Fucking hell yes.
Shut up, god damn it! You can get this thing for dirt cheap on Prop War level 1 for 16,000 rubles. You can attach the PU optic for about 11,000 rubles on top of that. Where is this guy? Am I not seeing anybody? I'm so confused. Oh fuck. Yo, Scallywag. Thanks for the tier 1 2-month. Did I just crumple that guy? I did. I think it's gonna become the ultimate value weapon. Holy shit. I like the 3.5 times scope though. It feels really nice for the game. Oh, okay. Dude, fuck this. I'm going like pure Mosin, alright? Ooh. Oh!
Not long after patch 10.5, in November of 2018, came both patches 10.7 and 10.8. Thankfully, we could now mark all handbook items as viewed simply by clicking the numbered badge on your inventory, something that many players still aren't aware of over 3 years later. Now, once again, the zeroing of optics and how players' FOV settings affected it was claimed to have been fixed, but after doing extensive testing and analysis, I was able to determine that not only was it still broken, but I was able to explain exactly why the issue was in the game, what the causes were, and proposed a potential fix that many in the community could get behind. Now, luckily for us, in record time, this update saw the MP7 gamma glitch quickly patched, which was quite nice. Due to feedback from the community about the behavior of scavs, they were nerfed back down to being much less accurate, but still aggressive, which in my opinion was very good, even if they were very often a little bit derpy. Now, despite the issues, they felt really good for the game at the time. Given how difficult, random, and punishing PvP can be in Tarkov, and given the suboptimal design of AI characters in general, I've pretty much always argued that scavs in this state, coupled with PvP, provided the most enjoyable and least frustrating gameplay. November of 2018 saw patch 10.5, with another wipe of all of the player levels and stashes. It was around this time that most of the community discovered that we had all been so wrong about the Mosin. While many players rejoiced because the introduction of the Mosin gave newer, arguably less skilled players a much more accessible budget option to be able to compete with even the most heavily geared players, this led to nearly every raid being filled with naked PMCs running around carrying solely this rifle, putting them on nearly equal footing in many combat situations against even the most heavily geared players, leading to a situation very similar to the gamma glitch. And because of that, you could argue that this period of time was the spark that ignited the endless debate regarding risk versus reward that has remained burning to this day. The emotions of many of us at the time were chiseled into the stone of Tarkov history and the crime against humanity that still remains as an iconic composition, known as Mosin Man. Allow me now to do a quick poetic reading of the lyrics contained therein to hopefully communicate the sentiment of the time. Mosin Man, we were fucking hyped when we heard the plans we didn't understand. Mosin Man, one-tapping, fully geared dudes is fucking bullshit. Mosin Man, we trusted Nikita, but he had a plan. The joke's on us, it was a fucking scam. Mosin Man, can you believe these assholes are worse than them hatchlings? Yes, I can. Mosin Man, trust it's the truth when they smash forts. I just don't understand. Mosin Man, I can't believe it's come to holding one in my hand. If you can't beat 'em, fuck it, join 'em, man. By now, along with Mosin Man, I had created a total of 10 Tarkov parody songs, covering everything from Coldplay, Imagine Dragons, Creed, Toto, and even the song that played during the ending credits of the original Portal game.
Nikita, don't leave us. We're sending you all our energy. Lots of us will do our best to help you. Just send me the source code. That was a joke, haha, fat chance.
This update also came with another massive change: consumable and medical animations. Now, eating, drinking, and using medical items was not an instantaneous action that could be done simultaneously while running or fighting, merely a short progress bar shown on the screen. They were now full-blown actions that took priority over most other actions in the game, not only leading to a much more immersive experience, but also slowing down combat considerably. Until this point, every player had basically been trained to simply spam their hotkeys linked to their medical items while they ran around during combat. But now we all had to break old habits and learn to move, find cover, and determine when we were going to fight and when we were going to retreat and heal. Now before we move on to arguably the biggest change that this game has ever seen, I want to give a special thanks to this video's sponsor, me. Now due to recent events leading me to cut ties with one of my major sponsors,
Oh, and there's the reroll.
not that they ever really fairly compensated me in the first place, as well as my desire to be independent, giving me the freedom to pursue new opportunities, I'm currently not sponsored by any companies. If you enjoy this kind of in-depth Tarkov content that takes quite a while to research and produce, and want to support me in my endeavors to continue improving my content and making more like it in the future, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does make a huge difference, big or small. Alrighty, back to the show. Now we come to what's arguably the most significant and controversial feature ever added to the game, the flea market. Initially referred to by BSG as the Rag Fair, although that moniker would never really be adopted by the community, was the introduction of the first open market of items between players. Prior to this change, there was effectively 4 ways that players could get items. The first was purchasing them from traders, which we know from our earlier discussion related to press accounts was limited to a small number of items. The second way was to obtain those items as quest rewards. The third way was to obtain certain items was to enter a raid with friends who would drop those items for you if they were feeling particularly generous or maybe they had extras that they didn't need. I remember in some of my earliest raids, one of my more experienced friends would drop me Salewas, morphine, and even a factory key, one of the most sought after items in the game at the time. For those new players now, this was arguably the red key card of early Tarkov. The final and most difficult way to obtain most items was, of course, to find those items in raid, many of which either had a single specific spawn location on a single map or were otherwise exceedingly rare in things like jackets or scav pockets or backpacks. For context, here's a few examples of extremely rare and desperately sought after items at the time. Room 222 of the Shoreline Resort West Wing was filled with rare gun spawns and tech items like graphics cards, which at the time had no use in the game but were still highly sought after for their high trader sale price and as requirements for quests. The key for this room most commonly spawned inside of the water treatment plant on Shoreline on a chair in one of the back rooms. The key for Shoreline's 310 in the East Wing, the room with some of the most rare and valuable treasure loot in the game at the time, Bitcoin, gold chains, lions, and wooden clocks, spawned inside of this bus on customs. Now coincidentally, I found this key on the first day of the wipe on 10.5, and literally within the same raid I lost this key to the multi-item discard bug that I mentioned earlier. Flash drives were required for skiers' What's on the Flash Drive quest, and at the time, as far as I can remember, there was basically one place to find them, sitting on the ground inside this tent on woods. The meta at the time for completing this quest was to spawn in with just a hatchet or maybe a pistol so that you could run faster and make a beeline for the tent and hope that it spawned and that you were the first one there. Finally, the factory key was most commonly found, although still very rarely, sitting on this table inside of the small office in 3-story dorms on customs. While these keys didn't have a particularly high monetary value, like they couldn't be sold for lots of rubles to traders, the utility value of these items, basically what you could get by using them and looting the rooms that they would unlock, it was extremely common at the time to make use of certain spawns to instantly rush these locations to see if you had essentially won the Tarkov lottery. Now the addition of the flea market, a place where a nearly limitless supply of basically every item in the game that could be bought or sold for prices that, at least in theory, would be dictated by the supply and demand of those items in the global Tarkov economy, would completely change the game in countless ways. All of those pesky instances where you wanted to trade items with friends and you'd have to go into a raid and risk getting spawn killed or risk having your items fall through the floor were no more. Now players could basically complete sham sales, putting some extremely low value item up for sale like a bandage or a useless key, requesting to barter for the item that they wanted to trade their friend for, at which point their friend would search for that barter sale and complete it, effectively allowing you to trade items outside of raids for next to no cost outside of the minimal market fee. Now, at launch, the flea market also came with a few specific implementation details that were troublesome, annoying, and arguably problematic. When listing an item for sale, you could choose to pay a little bit extra to have that item listed as a priority item, which would highlight it in the list of items for sale and put it at the top of the list. Simply due to the nature of the design of the priority items, these sales were almost always more expensive than non-priority items, simply taking advantage of lazy players who didn't want to find the cheapest item for sale. What's worse is that while there was basic sorting and filtering to the flea market, your settings didn't persist between visits to the flea market screen, and the problem was that the default settings were pretty shitty. They defaulted to displaying priority items, meaning that every time you wanted to buy an item for, of course, the cheapest price possible, you had to click and scroll through countless pages just to find it. At the same time, sales involving dollars or euros were not properly calculated based on their true conversion rates, something that actually still remains in the game to this day, although to a lesser extent. But this led to countless scams like people using priority sales and listing their items for dollars instead of rubles, totally ripping people off. Another issue with sales at this time had to do with the in-game item delivery system, which was used for both collecting insurance as well as collecting the money earned from flea market sales. Every individual batch of returned insurance items, as well as flea market sales, was presented to users as individual messages, requiring that you open up countless messages to collect each, and each item on the screen had to be manually moved over to your stash. There was no consolidated screen or a collect all button at the time. The worst aspect of this was that anytime you wanted to sell an item with a large quantity, most commonly stacks of ammo, players could basically grief you by abusing this system, purchasing one round at a time over and over, with each individual sale being its own separate message and own separate collection screen, making it extremely frustrating to collect all the money from your sale. Now, for additional context, at the time, stacks of rubles were limited to 100,000 rubles each, meaning that money effectively took up much more inventory space than it does today. One of the biggest issues that the flea market introduced was the fact that there was no limitation on what could be bought or sold, as well as the quantity or price. Anything could be put up on the flea market, even items purchased from traders, many of which were quest items that were unlocked by high-level players with greater trade loyalty, greater player levels, and there were no controls over where players got these quest items that they could eventually turn into traders. This led to an arguably problematic game loop where many players would grind their way through early quests, leveling up their PMCs and trader reputation as fast as they could, allowing them to unlock early game quest items and then sell those items back on the flea market for exorbitant prices, allowing them to get rich and progress through the game even faster. The players that lagged behind in terms of progression were happy to pay these ludicrous prices simply to avoid the challenge of actually playing the game to find these items themselves. For a while, the Tarkov meta had completely transformed. Before, it had been that players had to go into raids, engage in combat, look for items, loot those items, and then either by surviving the raid with those items on them or stuffing them in their protector cases, turn those items in to complete their quests, into essentially being one of two different classes of players. The first rushing through quests on the first day of the wipe, becoming scalpers for the latecomers to the patch, and then those latecomers would largely avoid raids as much as possible because it was simply easier to avoid the unknown time, money, and gear risk associated with questing, and accept the unfortunate but known cost of buying their way through the quests. For many players, there was simply no reason to risk taking any gear into raids, increasing the number of hatchlings, and then the players that did take gear into raids focused almost entirely on completing quests as fast as possible. Many of the things that made Tarkov what it was for so many players in the previous years, the risk and reward associated with taking gear into raids, engaging in PvP, completing quests, and then surviving, were effectively dead. There were two other massively significant factors at the time that made many of these problems even worse. First, there was a relatively small stock of items available for sale from traders, with no personal limits. Now, this was never really a huge problem before the market because the amount of total money in the economy was a tiny fraction of what it would become in the post-flea market era. The amount of wealth any individual had was mostly tied up in item and weapon cases that were filled with gear. The amount of money any player could make on any given day was limited to what they could successfully loot from raids, whether it was stuffed in their protector case before dying or brought out of raids on survival, and how much those items could be sold for to traders. If you had a handful of cases and 1 million or 2 rubles, that would effectively last you forever. There was really no reason to have 10 or more million rubles, as there wasn't really much that you'd be able to spend it on. Because of this, the prices of most items like armor, medical items, and ammunition was comparatively tiny compared to what those prices would become today. We really didn't have inflationary pressures causing the prices to go up. And not only that, but players didn't really have the liquid assets available to buy massive quantities of things like ammo or attachments. There was really no reason for them to do it. The only thing they could do with these items was to personally use them or sell them back to traders, but that would be for a loss. Now, because of those facts, coupled with the introduction of the flea market, small global trader limits with no individual limits and low trader prices with the ability to make limitless profits from selling items in bulk on the flea, nearly every remotely useful or sought-after item in the game would be sold out from traders literally fractions of a second after they reset. Not only that, then trying to purchase those disgustingly inflated prices from the flea market was also nearly impossible, as many were also instantly bought up from the flea as well. All of these things combined led to an uproar from the community as a whole, from Redditors to forum members and content creators who at the time attributed this rather complicated issue to yet another set of oversimplified new boogeymen, macros, and flea market bots. While macros and flea market bots could very well have contributed at least partially to these issues, the true causes of these issues and the costs of what BSG would do to combat these apparent issues wouldn't be realized until over a year later, something that we're going to revisit in a future episode. Now, back on October 11th, a whole month before the initial release of the flea market, given the issues that I had predicted there would be with its design, I had the following prediction.
I just have a feeling people are gonna be manipulating it to the point where it's gonna be almost unplayable, and then Battlestate's gonna have to come in and be the invisible hand in the market.
Within hours of the flea market being added to the game, my prediction had come true. Flea market manipulation had been demonstrated by Pestily, using himself and the community to use the new dynamic trader pricing based on flea market sales to boost the price of one of the lesser used 9x18 rounds to the point where it costs less to buy from Prep War at 27 rubles a round than you would get from selling it to Mechanic, 98 rubles per round, essentially giving players a vehicle to generate infinite money. It wouldn't be long for this dynamic trader pricing based on flea market sales to be turned off, and to this day has never been re-implemented. Another issue that Pestily indirectly exposed with the flea market had to do with the quest item issue that I mentioned previously. On the first day of the wipe, he raced through the quest progression as fast as he could on his way to getting level 40, something he was able to do in basically one sitting, eventually unlocking Saluas from Therapist, at which point he was able to purchase them from her and then turn around and sell them on the flea market for upwards of 100,000 rubles, with the only limitations being how much money he had in the bank and global trader limits. Now, on the first day of the wipe, only minutes after unlocking this highly sought-after quest item, he made over 20 million rubles from the flea market. Now, not long after that, he was up to 30 million from doing the same thing with Morphine, another rare early quest item at the time. Now, later, he moved over to buying and selling the 60-round magazines needed for the Prep War quest snow cones that required 6 of them at the time, although he sold those for only slightly more than they cost to purchase to still make a bit of money while also making it easier for the community to do these early quests. Between those sales and the market manipulation that took place, only a few hours into the new wipe, Pestily had amassed 3.5 billion rubles. These issues with the flea market had some really serious implications for the game's economy, as well as potentially fueling things like external websites and services dealing in real money trading and other nefarious activities. As a direct result of this, not long after the flea market was added to the game, a number of players had made hundreds of millions of rubles, and it was only getting worse. So once Nikita had gotten wind of what was going on, he placed individual trader limits on those initial quest items to prevent more players from abusing the system. While this partially alleviated some of the problem, the result of this was that all of those quest items would still sell out in basically the same amount of time as they did before, except rather than being distributed to a small handful of players, it would be spread out equally amongst a larger number of people, which did reduce the extent of the price gouging that was occurring at the time, but didn't solve the primary issues of players still being able to buy their way through the quests. The concept of individual trader limits, along with some additional future changes related to turning in items for quests, would have ripple effects on the game that all of us would be experiencing to this day. Now that all brings us to December of 2018, and with it, patch 0.11, which we're going to be dolphin diving into on the next episode. Now before we get to the final montage of some of the most epic and hilarious moments from this period, I want to humbly ask one more time for your support on Patreon and give a huge thanks to all my patrons thus far. You guys are all legends, and I'll see you next time.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Pestilly and welcome to the Pews.
Fuck it! Go, go, go!
Ну, ноги в руки на промыслы, братва.
Dude, did you see his arm?
Hold your fire.
Shit. I'm your friend. Don't kill me. Don't do it. Don't do it.
He had an ult in. He has an ult in. No. 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 Oh my god.
Is that a scav or a player?
There's a scav behind you, whoever's still running.
Alright, everyone inside the house. Alright, everyone's back to a wall, Alright. Get the scav.
I'm gonna fucking kill him!
Oh, fucking
I'm gonna fucking kill him! He doesn't know who to. He flicked me off!
I got him!
Oh shit! Oh shit! No! No! God damn it, game! God damn it! Holy fuck, you are the worst in the world! How is this guy so bad?
Hi. Hi. Hi.
No way am I dealing with this alien scav.
Да заебал, понял я, понял!
Explain the premise of this game. The premise of this game is you go into a raid, you take some equipment into a raid maybe, you kill other people, you take their shit, you get the fuck out. And then maybe you can return back with some of the said shit that you just got. And then you get more shit. And now that you have more shit, you can get out again, okay? And come back with even more shit. You understand? And if you die, you lose everything.
I'm done. Connor, I'm done.
What do we got here?
What? Move! Keep up. Son of a...